Welcome to the Grow As We Go podcast. I'm Sam, breathwork and embodiment coach, muse, and self-growth junkie.
And I'm Anthony, your co-host, transformational men's coach, and general question asker.
Here we create space for natural, vulnerable, and deeply connecting conversations on life as it happens, wisdom that I've picked up along the way, and tools to truly enjoy this beautiful life you've been given. I want to appreciate you for being here, whether this is your first time or you've been here since the beginning. We love feedback here, so leave your thoughts and takeaways from this episode in the reviews section of this podcast. This also helps the podcast become a bit more relevant in search reviews. Another way you can support this podcast is by following me on Instagram at Samantha__Charles and take a screenshot of this episode to share it on your social media and share your takeaways so that your junkie friends can come and get their fix too. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Grow As We Go. I'm Sam.
And I'm Anthony.
And we're going to do a part 2 of the previous episode because we're listening to it and realizing it had like a pretty abrupt ending. And I think I was having a challenging time with that episode. Not the whole time, but like there were certain parts of it that were difficult for me to navigate. And I know that I had mentioned that in the beginning, but and the reason for that, Anthony also had a bunch of matter of facts that were flying around, and I couldn't.
4.
Yeah, that's a lot.
I am aware.
And I couldn't catch them all, you know.
Okay, well.
And then like the perception of, or the way that it sounded when I'm like, that you and me were in a relationship and it's tragedy. I was like, oh, it's interesting.
It's oh
no, actually it's not interesting. It's tragic. And I was like, oh God.
Tragedy.
Yeah.
Romeo and Juliet over here.
Anyway, this is going to be part 2. And part of what I want to also focus on, or, you know, the lesson out of this episode gets to be, around opening your heart and experiencing new levels of love, and what that journey for me has looked like, and what, you know, I hope that there are some little nuggets that you can take out of this, and maybe even if it relates to pieces of your story, and, you know, how that journey could look like for you. So that's what is happening here.
Mm-hmm. When we last left our intrepid heroes, we were right at you meeting me and then you telling like your story, how it's an empowering experience for those listening. And then you said, anyway, the episode was over. So.
Yeah. I think it was like, you know, you and me met, and I think where I ended up trailing off there was like, you know, talking about the one side of it being tragic, right? Like the ending of the relationship being tragic, and it looks a certain way, and because there was like, you know, the way that things, just the timing of things, right? Like I met you and I went to ALA, that leadership and emotional intelligence training that really uncovered like a bunch of stuff, and I talked about that at length in episode 1. Just the stuff that uncovered, and then the ending of a relationship, and it's like the timing and of those 3 things happening, and all the things that I was uncovering within that relationship for me, and the ways that I was showing up, and the experiences that we were having around just a lot of different things, and like kind of dysfunctional coming to light for me. And yeah, there was a lot that was happening, and it all looked a certain way. And that's what I mean when I say like I don't like how it looks. There was a lot going on in my world, and what I feel like stood out to like people on the outside, I suppose, is the appearance that like I left a perfectly good relationship for you, even though that's not the entirety of the story.
Right.
It goes a lot deeper, like I said in the last episode.
So grab a shovel and let's get deeper, I guess, right?
Yeah, so this is going deeper here.
The way that you told your story, I think, was really intentional about how your journey through this whole experience was just so, not chaotic, but like there were so many puzzle pieces that were falling into place for you.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious, like, what were the influences and factors that specifically came up for you that led you to the decisions that you made and the choices that you ended up making?
What were the influences?
Yeah.
I mean, ALA.
Yeah.
Like, I don't... It all comes back to ALA.
But like in specific, like what
yeah,
were the
sure.
elements of that?
Well, I was learning a lot about myself and like this like confusion thing that came up and amnesia, which I'm pretty sure I talked about that in episode 1. But you know, I had these, and I do a lot of IFS, which is internal family system therapy, and it works with parts. And so if you're not familiar, it's like there's a movie called Inside Out where
So
there's like this young girl is living life, and it's like you start developing these parts inside of you, like and in the movie they're like in her brain running the show, you know, and sometimes they're fighting over different things, or like certain experiences evoke that emotion, where it's like joy and sadness and anger and fearfulness, and sometimes those parts of us will take over the show. And it's not the true authentic self of who we are, but it's like a protection mechanism and to keep us safe, and that's all they're trying to do. But sometimes it's just highly dysfunctional. And so something I was really uncovering during that time, and like it's still a work in progress, as if you've been following like religiously watching or listening to the episodes, there's been a couple of them where like I'm like really struggling. I forget which one it was. I think it was the tightropes one.
Yeah, the one between
episode 6 is the tightropes of walking the line of acceptance. And so it's like
so good.
That one I was really struggling with. We had to keep pausing and like, what were we just talking about? Because I have this like part that comes in and just swoops me up, and it's like for a forgetfulness. Like I literally forget what I was saying, what we were talking about, like the context of the whole conversation. And then like confusion. I get really confused about what the truth is and what's going on there. And a lot of what was uncovered for me throughout ALA was kind of like where that came from. And also just a higher awareness of it, so that I could be more mindful and more aware of that whole process and learning what to do about it. I, got a lot of support throughout ALA. We had different coaches, and I also talked with you about a lot of different experiences that I was having. And, getting to know you and learning your story too, which, you shared some on
episode 3.
Yeah. And I think you have more that you're interested in sharing also.
Oh, yeah.
But, just hearing your story and in your lessons, I was learning a lot about boundaries, because I feel like that's a thing that I learned a lot from you, and also ALA. But I think specifically from you. And I remember getting feedback from ALA, some of the exercises, that I'm like a doormat and a pushover, and like, lost myself, and
yay. how'd that like turn into moving forward? How'd that manifest?
I think the way that looked was like, me just not having boundaries, right? Like, and not even knowing what boundaries are. And I know that we talked about that.
I remember that conversation. That was a really good one.
Yeah, we had that in
episode 12, I think.
Yeah, episode 12, where we talk more about boundaries. But like, yeah, I'm not going to go into it because there's episode 12 is
Right.
there. But just me not having boundaries and me, like acquiesce. I think about that quote that I read where it's like, oh, let me find it. Okay, so there's this quote that I found it was like a poem on Instagram, and we can link it in the show notes.
Ooh.
But the girl who wrote it, her name's Nikita Gill. And so it says, "A man tells me I have the single trait required to be a good mother. I know how to give until I am empty. And by this, he meant I am very good at breaking my soul into pieces for everyone that I love. And I am good and quiet at being taken for granted. Can you blame me? I come from a legacy of women who were raised to be useful rather than joyful. Once upon a time, even my grandmother was just a little girl. She loved flowers and had a laugh as free as a cascading waterfall. That was before she was made to carry the weight of a crumbling family on her back. How can I look at the skies with hope and think that I could not have to carry them too? Every woman I have ever loved has been Atlas, holding the heavens on her shoulders, giving and giving until she is devoured."
Wow.
So that to me is like, I mean, I really resonate with that a lot. And a part of that, like being a doormat, essentially, right? It's like giving and giving and giving until the point where you lose yourself and you don't even know who you are anymore, and you don't trust yourself and you put yourself last, and like, no self-respect, right? But it's like, who wants to say that? No, I'm just really loving and kind. Like, I don't know, is it like there's a line there, right?
Yeah.
And that's where I think the conversation of boundaries comes in, of like limits of love, and like being able to give to a point where you're still respecting yourself.
Right, because boundaries isn't, we'll get to it a little bit later too, but boundaries isn't just about giving, it's also about receiving.
Yeah. And so whenever I think about boundaries, I also think about, like, I've learned a lot about codependency, as well as, like, I mean, it was in that same time frame where I'm like learning about codependency and like narcissistic traits.
Sure.
And also the like anxious and avoidant attachment styles, which that was one of the most recent episodes, 13.
Yeah.
And so I was learning about all those things, and I think about now, like, I'm doing this messaging course about like marketing, and there's like this framework in my mind that's building, so I'm relating it to that right now, where you have in your life, and like whenever you're marketing to people, there's people that are symptom aware, which is like, they're aware that there's some sort of problem. Like if you think about it really in a relationship, it's like, oh, well, we argue, or there's not good communication, and like there's something wrong. We're fighting a lot. We're not. There's something wrong, so we're symptom aware. And then you get to be problem aware, which is like, oh, there's a problem here. Like there's a lack of boundaries. I'm avoidant. I'm anxious, attachment, whatever. Where it's like typically the problem, it's like, oh, there's an identity like that you can package up into, and you have a deeper understanding of what problem is causing these symptoms. Yes. And then you get to where you're, searching for solutions, or become solution aware. And that looks like, setting boundaries and doing the inner healing work to like heal your inner child, so that you can accept levels of love, or like accept levels of being by yourself, if we're talking about like anxious and avoidant attachment styles. Yeah. In that particular example. But so for me, it's like realizing codependency, and like going from like arguing and in my relationship, there being arguing and like miscommunications and double standards that were really challenging for me to like speak up about and or like communicate. And then like perceptions of like the way that we're experiencing realities. And I want to talk about that, if I've not already, I think I have, like perceptions. That was another episode.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of episodes. I feel like I'm referencing all our
11,
old
yeah.
stuff. Episode 11. It's like hold fast despite the pressures of perceptions, which I think that one's a really good one. And perceptions is a really big lesson in my personal life. I think we all have like some pretty core lessons that follow us throughout our healing journey, and perceptions has been one of them for me. And just the variety of the human experience. And I think I said that about 20 times in that episode, but it's just, it's fascinating to me. And that's what I mean when I talk about like the variety of reality that a couple of people can experience. And we were talking about having an episode about that because you and me were just having a disagreement in a way that turned into a conversation about like, no, this is how I experienced that conversation. And you had a totally different experience, and it being like, okay, well, neither of us are wrong or right. And being able to hold space for that.
Yeah.
Instead of it turning into like
a big old fight or something.
Yeah. Like, no, I'm right and you're wrong.
Right. Yeah. Who cares? That's not important.
And so some of the problems that I became aware of, sort of going from symptom aware to problem aware, is there being like codependency in the relationship, and then lack of boundaries as well. And those two, it goes together hand in hand. I feel like it's kind of like the anxious avoidant trap. There's also this trap and codependency stuff as well. That'd be interesting to like mix those two teachings, because I think they're really similar. We'll do an episode on it. And then, solution aware becoming like me setting boundaries and that not going well. Like,
sure.
I mean, I think about the way that I was treated within that, and it wasn't great. And so, yeah, and ultimately the ending of that relationship, which, anyway, well, I'm not going to go into that because it's not the point of this. So yeah, I started up putting boundaries, and it didn't go so well.
You find out a lot about a person when you set boundaries. I think this is when anyone asks me for like dating advice, especially I work with teenagers right now, and so they sort of ask for advice, and I'm like, they don't get the answers that they're looking for. But whenever you are first spending time with someone, set a boundary with them and see how they respond. Because how a person respects your basic setting of boundaries is going to tell you a whole lot about them. To say like, I need this space, and so I'm going to communicate that. And if they appreciate the communication, that's a good sign. And if they're like, well, why? And they question, they push your boundary right away. It's like, that's also a sign that that's just going to continue to be how they respond to you setting boundaries, because maybe they've never had someone set a boundary with them before. Maybe they've been able to do whatever they want, or maybe they just don't understand you because you've lived your whole life. If you've lived your whole entire life not setting boundaries, it's going to feel strange and difficult to do so. And it's also going to feel strange to hear, like, what? This isn't you.
Yeah.
You don't do this.
Yeah. And I think that, I mean, we really dived into that in episode 12. So if you're interested in learning more about boundaries, definitely go and listen to that one. It's called Limits of Love, a Practical Guide to Boundaries. And yeah, I mean, I think Limits of Love is a really interesting like title, because it not only like limits of love makes it sound like we're like limiting love, and I think we even talk about that, but it's like it's also opening you up to access higher levels of love by like, this is how I deserve to be treated. And so there's like a worthiness conversation there where it's like a self-respect, like I was sharing earlier, like have some self-respect, and the love that you deserve, because you're gaining self-respect, like you're huge. Doormat, you know.
Well, and the self-respect comes from truly the like opening of your own heart. That the setting the boundaries is not, like I said, it's not just saying, okay, you can only love me this much. No, it's like, I deserve to be loved a certain way, and I will open my heart to have that level of love be accessed, which elevates the amount of love that you're able to receive as your heart fills and expands with the love that's available to you. Because basically you got to think about it like, you know, the stomach is a very elastic organ. So if you give it, a little bit, right, it gets smaller to accommodate, or it gets larger to accommodate when you expand. I'm not saying, gluttony and gorge yourself or anything like that, but just that thought process of you get to let things fill up, in this idea that like we want to be overflowing with love. Like that's my alignment. Like I want to be overflowing and so filled with love that it pours out of my heart and my mouth. As I think I said in my own story, out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. So if your heart is overflowing with love, you will speak love. Is it? It's from the Bible too.
That's funny. Oh, he was quoting Jesus.
He was, yes. I think it's Paul, but either way, it doesn't matter.
Oh God.
So opening your heart and accepting new levels of love, that is not what society talks about. It's not like that's our aim or that's our goal, and we don't often end up there.
I don't know what men are told, but I feel like there's this, I have to speak for myself as a woman in this society. I get these message that like you give and you give and you give and you give, and that's what love looks like and then what the effect of that is, or the result of that is you being just like this shell of a person and don't know who you are, and like you don't have any energy and you lack vibrance in your life, and it's like give.
And shell is such a good word because a shell is a hard exterior.
Yeah.
That like I've heard you say before. There was that Instagram post that you posted a little bit ago where you're talking about being hardened.
Yeah. It was like last week. And it was interesting because I got I started a lot of really interesting conversations about like, because I was just sharing this experience of like me particularly this last month, I feel like has been really challenging with for me, and about like opening my heart, and like it's really uncomfortable for me to open my heart to new levels of love. And I think I would say that's difficult for a lot of women. I think that there are women that are out there like hardened. And I got some confirmation on that whenever like, I said that in my stories, and women were like, yeah, I could totally relate. And I'm like, oh wow, that's interesting. Cause for me, like, I don't think anyone would ever, I'll just share what I shared on the Instagram post essentially was like, I don't think that anyone would ever use the words like hardened or disconnected or cold to describe me. But there's a way, like, on the inside of me, I do feel like, sure, I'm loving and kind and thoughtful and but like on the inside, there's like this little wall that like I keep hidden behind a curtain, and it's like there's this wall around my heart to protect it. And I think that within that, that comes for me growing up, love being like neglect or disappointment, especially. And so it's like, oh, poor you, like you can't accept love, like of all the problems there are to have in the world, like, but it's like, and I'm like joking with myself about that and kind of poking fun at the whole thing. Cause I feel like we have to do that sometimes, right? Yeah. Like if we take it so seriously, it's just like, right. Jesus Christ, it's not that serious, people. Oh God, that's Michael Singer's teachings. Some of it, like, can we just zoom out a little bit and see how silly we are, and like self-absorbed, just like back out a bit. But yeah, like me not being able to accept levels of love, and then like opening my heart and allowing myself to be vulnerable and allow love in, and my heart expanding and having these like visceral experience and physical experiences the last few weeks of like my heart physically like swelling, like it feels like it's achy and it's full, like I have that physical sensation. And then also like cold kind of going down my arms, like as if the story that I'm making about that is that it's like an armor melting off, or like an ice casing melting off.
It's so powerful. Yeah.
And it's been really, really cool, and it feels rewarding. And to like, okay, so like all this uncomfortableness I've been feeling around love and like allowing it in, I just feel like I just cry all the time too now, you know? But yeah, and I think that one of the things that I shared is that I think that women as a society like to blame men for our problems. And sure, there is a patriarchy and there's a lot wrong with it.
Absolutely.
And also, it's only half the coin. Because I really do believe that like the world would be a better place if there were more men in the world who could give love, you know, in a healthy way. And that women would have the ability to receive it.
Yeah.
Because if you think about like, I know that there are good men out there and there are men who share love in a healthy way, and there are women who can't receive it.
Yeah, because it's potentially dangerous, right? Like that's the thought process behind it.
Well, yeah, or either thought process or past experiences,
right.
And that's where it gets, you know, sure, there is a huge problem with the patriarchy.
Yes, and like as a guy who is one of those loves to give love kind of people, you know, I definitely have friends that are women who I laud and applaud and am grateful for, and there are very few of them who I think accept that and don't just think like, what are you trying to get from me? Like, it can't just be from a genuine place of like a good heart or kindness. Like there has to be some sort of ulterior motive, some sort of desire or want that I have. And the truth is, I don't. I have an amazing partner, so I don't need to have anybody else like that in my life. 1, 2, I'm not trying to get you to buy anything from me. It's just, maybe I want the world, maybe here's what I want from you. I want the world to be filled with women who are receiving the love that their divine femininity deserves.
Yeah. And I think that that's like, you know, can be a masculine feminine conversation in the way that those energies interplay. Whenever we think about men giving love and women being able to receive it, and that doesn't mean that women only receive and don't give, right? Like that's out of balance. And that's not, you know, we're not only purely feminine energy. It's like we also have the masculine where we also give energy or give love.
Yes.
If we're just talking about that. But like, there being like, the feminine and masculine energy, I guess. I don't really know where I was going with that.
Well, we'll do an episode on that later.
Sure.
you have that one that's, you know, Father, Son, and Mother Earth.
Yeah, I like named episode that 5, really esoteric because I had like done Hape or something. But yeah, it's episode 5, energies, Mother Earth and Father Sky. I dive into like masculine and feminine energy as well as like the energies of the elements. So fire, air, water, and earth. And I really do like that episode a lot. I thought it was really cool. So if you're interested in that, episode 5, if you've not listened to it.
You were also wrestling with this thing that you heard from Pat's mentor, from someone's mentor.
Yeah, but I think too, just to go back to the like it being half the coin of like blaming men for our problems, I think too it's like being able to receive love and then also implementing boundaries, you know, like we talked about earlier. They're creating boundaries and creating a safe place for your heart to be able to fill with that love and be able to expand, because like boundaries are what create a safe place for you to be able to accept and receive that love. That's been my experience.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that the masculine's job is to do that, right? Like to create those safe spaces for them to be.
Oh yeah, or like hold the container, right? Yeah. But that's not always the case. And so if that's not what's happening for you as a woman or as a, you know, a more feminine energy person, you know, you get to call on your inner masculine and create that for yourself by creating boundaries. I'm
glad you're calling this a part 2, because it's a part 2 to not only your story, but also to the boundaries episode. So
yeah, we're part 2 to a lot of things. We're expanding here.
That's right.
Expanding our hearts, expanding the topics of
it. Can we go? Is it okay? Are we ready to talk about it?
Yeah. So you were referring to a conversation that I had with my mom's partner, Pat. He was sharing with me something that his mentor had said So I think I was talking with him about, this was years and years and years ago.
Yeah.
Like probably 3 or 4 years ago. I was talking with him about just having some challenges in my relationship. And I think that's what I was sharing with him. Or maybe I didn't share with him and he just said it. You know, it's one of those divine timing things, right? Because that would be kind of interesting for me to be talking to him about that. I don't think I would do that. Or had... Anyway, semantics.
Anyway.
So the thing that he said, that his mentor had said, you know, like it only takes one. Mm-hmm. And the context of that is around, I think, being in relationships and also like the world. I mean, you can take that and put it into a lot of different contexts, I think. Like I think about that, be the change you want to see in the world, quote, also. And so that's how I took that. The way that I took that is, okay, because the context of what was going on in my relationship, and this was even before like the whole ENM journey, was like, okay, I'm having these challenges in my relationship about like levels of growth, I think, like, because self-growth and doing work on yourself and inner healing is like a really core value of mine and has been. I mean, like I think about all my relationships in the past and that being something that was uneven in what we cared about, I guess, if that makes sense. And so that was the context going through my head as Pat said this to me. Yeah. And so I put that quote into the context of my life of, okay, so if it only takes one, then if I just work on myself enough, it'll make a ripple effect. And it wasn't like a ripple effect. I was expecting a certain effect where it would just like fix everything, or like, you know, he would start caring about growth the way that I wanted him to. Ooh. And I think that goes back into another conversation about blaming other people for our problems, when really it's like I'm having control issues over here. And like believing that one person can shift, like that I could shift the other person and then therefore shift the relationship. Right. And then I think like throughout my ALA process, and I think I shared that with somebody, and it was like I came to realize that it doesn't necessarily mean that you stay. And I was like, what?
Like it only takes one means you go until it's fixed and you never waver, you never back down.
Right. It's like,
suddenly
okay,
the person will join you.
Yeah. And I think that's, you know, that's what I did on my healing journey. I think I don't remember if I shared this or not, but, you know, I was like, all right, well, if they're not interested in this the way I am, then I'm going to shift my focus to myself, and it's going to be what it's going to be.
I think the interesting thing is too, like that's your whole perception of the experience too, right? Like your experience was, I don't see this person growing the way that I want them to. And right. So there, I'm going to make the shift. Like, so there's a lot of personal responsibility there too.
Yeah. And I think too, that a part of that is around that perceptions conversation. You know, it's like how we all view life is through the lens of our experiences. Yep. And, you know, the way that I'm describing it is probably totally different than how somebody else would describe it.
Right.
And what their reality and what was going on for them. Because there's this, that's what I'm saying, is like you never know what is going on in people's lives. Mm-hmm. Like you see a certain decision or a certain action, or you see what they present to you, but like there is a whole ass inner world that is like the depths of the ocean that you could never understand or know. Like sometimes I think about like epiphanies that I've had in the shower. I'm in there for like, you know, maybe 10 minutes, but the epiphany happened in like a minute or less, and trying to explain that like 30-second interaction in my brain where it's like all these pew 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 pew, you know, and then like trying to explain that to you or through a Instagram post or even through a podcast, right? Like some of these are like, oh, these revelations that I've had, and here we are on here talking for like an hour.
Right, and just to try and explain the one little bit.
And so that like it's like that, I feel like that just perfectly shows like the complexity to people's inner lives.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, little tangent there.
Rabbit trails, your favorite part.
I know, I love it. All right, bring it back in. But yeah, the personal, responsibility and like realizing too, and that was so much of ALA's teaching is like how, like, where can you take responsibility in your life for the things that are happening, right? Instead of being a victim and like, oh, this is happening to me. How is this happening for you? How is this perfect for you? Like where's the lesson? Where's the growth opportunity? That's the lens that I see it through. And so with that, like coming to the realization that it doesn't mean that necessarily I would stay. Sure, you can, but that thought process was put in my head, and I'm like, oh God, and then ALA continues, and I'm like having all these other realizations, and there's like a lot of, we got coaching, and there was a lot of really powerful coaching moments that I got, particularly I remember one where I was talking with a coach and about this like amnesia and confusion thing that I was speaking about earlier. And then as I'm talking and she's asking different questions, I'm realizing like, oh my God, I have like done this in order to stay in relationship. Like confusion and amnesia played a role where it's like, oh, how could that happen? These people are supposed to be taking care of me. Like, no, we're not. We're going to just like totally shut off that experience from you. That's what the parts are doing. And so that, you don't know that that's happening because that doesn't make sense and it's confusing, and you really need to stay in relationships so that way they'll take care of you. Like we're talking about like baby stuff, like kids, but they taking care of me. I'm talking about like parents, my parents. And then like getting like this snapshot of past relationships and how historically that's what I did, like staying in relationship to the point of like way past the point where it made sense, and just forgetting things that had happened or shifting in my mind what my perception of it was and discrediting myself to myself. I don't know if I'm sure that's happened to a lot of people where you have an experience and you take it one way and then you're like talking yourself out of that as no, they couldn't do that. No, that wouldn't be that. Da, 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 da. And it's like, well, what if that's actually what did happen? Or anyway.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
So throughout your ALA process, then they just keep bringing stuff up.
Yeah.
I remember you saying like, it's like they gave me a shovel and I'm just digging up all this bullshit.
Yeah. I think that's what I said in episode 1, it's like the amount of bullshit that was uncovered for me throughout that whole process was insane. Yeah. And like another thing that's coming to mind too is another coach was telling, like I was having a mental breakdown, like a little mentee bee. And talking with him about, and it was like this totally irrational thing to me. I'm like, what? Why is this like, I think it was like asking somebody for a donation for this thing, like this fundraiser that we were hosting for people experiencing foster care. And so we were doing this like fundraising campaign, and I needed to ask somebody if people were asking different people for money. And it was like this one person that I was having a mental breakdown about asking. Like I had asked 20 other people, but it was this one person. And my coach is like, well, what else is going on in your life? And I'm like, well, this is my current living situation and and my relationship, this and that. And he's like, what's your, so we all have like this mantra sort of thing that we all have this mantra, and mine is, I'm a worthy, powerful, free woman. And so he asked what it was. And so I shared that with him. I was like, oh, I'm a worthy, powerful, free woman. And he's like, well, if you're weak and trapped, how are you ever going to feel worthy in that space? And I was like, fuck off, dude. Jesus, like, oh my God, that
genuinely.
really hit me. And, you know, he's like, why haven't you made a decision yet? And I was like, oh my God, so that's what's happening. You know, like, I'm going to keep having these mental breakdowns until I'm like really powerful and free, like living by that mantra that is so important to me.
Yeah.
And so, as I said, there was a lot going on in my world.
40 minutes of what's going on in your world.
No.
No, that's perfect. It's happening
lot.
exactly what was supposed to happen. So,
Okay.
there was a lot going on in your little world, and that led you to...
I mean, ending the relationship, essentially, is where I wound up. And I remember, too, like, not really knowing if I was going to, like, stay in relationship with you.
Yeah, I remember that.
Because...
Pretty vividly.
a traumatic experience.
No. But only a little bit.
Right.
Okay, that's not...
But, like, I didn't know because, again, like, that's not why I ended the relationship, right? Like, it wasn't this, like, trading game.
Right. Oh, yeah.
And too, because I noticed this pattern of my life and my past relationship is, like, jumping from relationship to relationship.
Right.
And I think you and me were talking about, like, ENM and that whole thing. And you're, like, starting to think that you're like, oh, I don't know about that. And I'm like, I don't think you're ENM. I think you were just dating.
I was like, wait, what? What are you talking about? Like, I was, you know, experiencing a lot of different people at the same time. And I was like, oh, I guess that means that I'm ENM, but also not at the same time, really. Like, it wasn't serious and deep. And for me, when things got, like, real and deep with you, I was like, I don't want to see anybody else. That's dumb. Like, why would I ever do that? Because I don't, you know, I supply a lot of my own needs. And when it comes to the relationship aspect of those needs of, like, you know, wanting to participate in life with someone and things like that, I was like, one's good enough for me. And so you were like, yeah, you're just dating. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. So how is this going to work then? Like, what are we doing?
Yeah. And, you know, I didn't know how it was all going to work. And again, like, not wanting to be trapped because freedom is my value and like one of my highest values. And I just, like, that was challenging for me too, to, like, navigate and figure that out. And that took a while as well.
For sure. And because what you need, well, not what you needed, but, like, what everybody's looking for, as I've been doing my journey through studying and understanding relationships, is that relationship is at its best when you are free to be loved without any constraint. And that doesn't mean that, like, you can do whatever you want to do. What it means is that the love that I or anybody has for the other person doesn't lead them to feel in this trapped state, that they're free to grow and free to evolve, and that you're free to have somebody to grow alongside. Not only grow alongside. Like, growing with and growing alongside is really important. But the fact that I remember you saying how much I teach you. Mm-hmm. And you have taught me a tremendous amount as well. And there are areas where we, like, are teaching each other about both. And we're like, oh, I don't agree with that. Or I think differently about that. And I'm like, oh, well, I think differently about that too. But, oh, that's really a really powerful perspective to take into my life.
Yeah. Well, I think too, like, the conversations are like intellectually, I don't like intellectually stimulating, I guess. And, like, in a way that is growing and expansive and respectful instead of kind of feeling like defensive and like,
let me defend my point to you.
Right.
It's more, we can expand each other's mind in this. Like, have you thought about it this way? And then thinking, well, I have thought about it that way now, and I don't like it. And you don't have to, right? It's not like saying the point of our conversations isn't to convince each other. The point of our relationship isn't for one of us to be right and the other person to be wrong. The point of our relationship is to be in that growth, because growth is a high value for both of us. And, you know, I remember there was also that piece of you saying that in our relationship that you feel led intellectually and emotionally, that, like, we're on this growth journey together, and there are ways in which I point us in that direction of growth, because you're able to say, I think back to an experience where we had where I was challenging you on something that we were disagreeing about, and you were challenging me too. And I ended up saying, it's not that I'm not open to it. It's that I felt really hurt and disrespected in this moment, and you haven't acknowledged that. And you were like, oh, I see. And I'm like, the end result is going to be the same, where you get to do what you want to do. But I really want to be heard and understood in this moment, and I'm going to push for that. And you were like, okay, I see that, and I acknowledge that. And then that was the end of the conversation. And how it, well, not really, but how it ended basically was me saying, yeah, of course you can do whatever you want to do. Like, I just need to hear that you understand and hear me. And so, like, that's what that leading of intellectual and emotional growth is like. You know that I'm going to come from that place of giving you the space to explore, while you're also, holding to your boundaries and holding to your word and the things that you said that you want in this relationship and in your life.
Yeah.
So that's what we're looking for in a relationship, is this love that's in alignment. And that level of love that's available is something that everybody gets to clear space in their heart for, because those are typically, for a lot of people, those are really stinking hard conversations to have. Anytime that there's disagreement, people are like, well, I want to be right.
Yeah.
And what does it look like to accept this higher level of love, where every single day you are loving this evolved version of the self? Like I've said before, like, I fall in love with a new version of you every day, because we are both growing constantly, and there's that deep polarity of the divine feminine and the divine masculine. And that's pretty cool, to say the least.
Yeah. Well, and I think, like what you were saying, loving different versions of each other is a reflection of loving versions of yourself, different versions of yourself.
Absolutely.
Like, you can't, that whole thing of, like, you're not able to love others until you love yourself.
Right.
And the love that you have for others and the way that your relationships go are a reflection of what's going on within you also, I think.
Yeah.
And you're talking about, like, leading and being led, and I think that, that's a masculine feminine conversation that gets to be had at some point. But my experience of pretty much all of my relationships in the past, like, I think about even just, my first relationship, my first boyfriend, like, because I've been in therapy since I was 15. Right. And so I felt like, I'm like, oh, would you please just, like, take care of yourself? Like, will you go to therapy? Will you do some sort of growth? Will you start looking inward? And I remember that being, like, kind of a pattern in, like, all my relationships, right? It's like, I felt like I was growing and trying to, like, drag them along in my self-growth junkiness.
Yeah. Which is funny, because you are truly, like, the most growth-oriented person I've ever met, in that pretty much every day you find something new about yourself that you're aware of, or you surrender to something, or you give power to something that matters to you. It is exponential how much you grow. So, like, dragging people along in the past is just, like, I don't think it's anybody's fault, especially since, like, the typical thing for men is that, like, men have the ability in our world to not have to grow. Life's pretty good for guys if they don't grow. They still get what they want. And so I just want to acknowledge your exponential growth.
Thanks. But yeah, I feel, and within that, it's like, I felt like I was leading, because that was a high value of mine and maybe not theirs,
right.
And I think ultimately that for me produced, like, a mothering effect, where it's like, why don't you just take care of yourself,
right.
And, like, can you just do these things that I'm wanting you to do in the way that I want you to do, which ties back into that, like, rabbit hole of blaming men for our problems, sure. Which, like, in reality, like, I'm having some control issues here, or, like, wanting you to see it the way that I see it, and, like, I'm right, and instead of holding space for, okay, we can have different different values here, and we can have different whatever, but like that wasn't the conversation, you know. And
Right.
and if that does become the conversation, it's like, all right,
Then what are we doing
you
here?
know, like these. And I feel like I've had conversations like that, but probably not with that same exact languaging.
Right.
But, you know, just like, this is really important to me.
Right.
And like, I really want this for you and for us because I see the value here and here and here.
Mm-hmm.
And like that not being seen or it's seen as valuable. And
Or just like, that's valuable for you, but like, I'm going to do my own thing.
right. And like, okay, cool. That's great. And
That leads to some
it leads
really,
to a certain
that leads
thing.
to tension.
Yeah, it does. And I remember talking with, I've talked with multiple people about this, but specifically in relationship where one person is doing the work. Typically, I mean, in my conversations, it's been the woman doing the work
Yeah.
and the men not.
Right.
At least to a similar level, or the men like doing just enough.
Oh,
That-
the bare minimum.
Yeah, just enough that it like kind of placates or calms her down, or
Right.
you know, whatever. And
But then even he takes a step back to see if she like notices.
maybe, yeah.
I mean, I've
And I
experienced
think that like I feel like throughout sharing my story and like sharing this, and even like years ago, you know, talking with women about like, we get together and we talk about our problems, you know.
Yeah.
And like becoming aware of there's like this epidemic of women doing the work and men not doing the work.
It's true.
And therefore like not being led in a way that we want to be led in the role of the divine masculine and feminine. And I mean, that gets to be another podcast episode because that's a whole nother can of worms that I'm tempted to open, but I'm not going to. But I think that within that there is a way that we're like doing all this work, and it's like, man, I'm just like holding the emotional growth and emotional like chaosness that emotions are of myself on this growth journey, of the kids on this growth journey, and of my partner on, like, if you're married and in a traditional relationship, of my partner. And like, I can't hold all this. This is
Right.
exhausting. And even if you don't have kids, it's like of me and my partner, or like whatever the dynamic is
My
there.
family and my work and
Yeah,
everything.
family and work. And it's like, I feel like it's a lot to hold, you
It
know.
is a lot.
It's Atlas.
Right.
Literally Atlas. Okay? Anyway.
So why did we get into this story? Like this part of your journey, and why did it take maybe a while for you to get to this part, to tell this story?
Well, I think because I don't know if that's exactly the answer to this question, but like part of the reason I'm sharing the story, like I said in the beginning, is it's been really uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I have done a lot of growth work in my life, and this has been one of the most uncomfortable, like physically also,
Yeah.
just uncomfortable parts of my journey. And like this last month in particular has been just really interesting. You know, there's been a lot of emotional ups and downs. And I share all of it because I think, like I said in part 1 of this episode, is there's a way that me sharing story, me sharing my life, and being really open about it either gives people permission or gives women the courage or whatever it is that you need. Gosh, I'm sorry. If you're on a similar path or having a similar experience, that you can believe in there being a different level of love that you can experience, because I think that maybe has not been shown to you the way that it's not been shown to me, or like wasn't shown to you as a child.
That's a
And then therefore is replicating and manifesting in certain ways in your
Right.
relationships today.
Right.
And so there's a way to heal that. And I know that there's a lot of women out there experiencing something similar because I
Right.
talk to a lot of y'all.
Right. And it's possible, like it's always possible and it's always available is the thing. Like no matter what relationship you're in, that level of love is available, and not necessarily in that relationship, but like there are people who can love in a very, very powerful way. That does not mean that you then have to be like romantically involved with them or anything like that. It's just like I love to love so much because my heart is so filled with it. And that part of that comes from my upbringing as well, is that like I tap into a divine love that is far beyond anything that I can produce. And so the love that comes from me isn't just my own. It's the energy of the universe. It's God's love. And so like because I have that deep belief, like that consistently sits within me and is shown to other people. It has been so even I got a message yesterday where someone was like, you did nothing but love me throughout high school.
Yeah.
Right. And I was just like, how beautiful. And when it came down to it, you made a decision fairly recently that you were like, yeah, I still want to continue a relationship with me. Because you realized not just that, like, oh, I want to be in a relationship. Didn't matter. I mean, if our relationship wasn't good, you also would have been like, get out of here, loser. Like,
Yeah.
not also being that, but the idea, you've said that a lot to me, like as a joke, right? But you recognized what was truly available for you, and that you knew that there's a different level of love.
Excuse me while I vomit.
I love how resistant you are to like receiving that. It just makes me so happy because I'm just like, good. You get to get that level of love all the time. So just get a bucket.
Yeah.
Oh, fun.
We out here just lessons on lessons.
Yeah, it's so funny. That lesson in particular can be a podcast episode. Like, how come we respond so viscerally to the thought or feeling of like being loved in a what feels like pure and true way?
Yeah. I mean, because it's disgusting. That's why. I'm kidding.
I'm so excited to talk about it. It's really fun.
Yeah, I think it's it's like upbringing stuff, right? Like,
Sure. Well, yeah.
And
there's a lot to it. As you said, there's a whole lot of pieces to
there's
this.
a whole can of worms up in there.
So to sum up, what did we learn today?
Lessons on lessons. There's episode 11, perceptions, which I feel like has been a huge lesson for me.
Yeah.
And learning to trust myself,
Right.
which is episode 1.
Right.
And so I guess there's not an episode on accepting new levels of love,
Except for this one.
and opening up your heart. But I think like the whole trusting yourself lesson requires loving yourself and believing yourself and believing in your intuition. And for me, that looked like ending a relationship, even though like on the surface I felt like I'm the only one it made sense to.
Yeah.
And which opens up, the next chapter of lessons for me, the accepting new levels of love. And then like, here we go with perceptions again, like arising, like I had shared earlier, of like it looking a certain way, the timing of it all, it looks like it's like this trading game, or like the grass is greener. And I mean, truly, that's not what was going on.
Right.
And there's a lot more going on. There's a lot of intention and a lot of, even though that's what it looks like in my inner world and the intentionality in which I approached this whole thing. I mean, I don't know how I could have done it anymore, I guess.
Right. I think that the key point there is that like you did not ask me, or not, like that part of your relationship was discussed and managed and listened to and heard by a whole team of people who were supporting you, there for you, asking you questions. I truly didn't have anything to do with any of those decisions. I literally intentionally backed off because I was like, this is not is really important for me not to be
Right.
a factor in this.
Right.
And then also on the other side of that is, you know, when we got to earlier or about the middle of this year, we were like, hey, we should do a podcast together. Because we recognized that the grow as we go, there's a song by Ben Platt, it's beautiful. If you haven't listened to it, you need to listen to it. And it's the inspiration for this podcast title.
Well, I think too, like, growth being a high value, right? And grow as we go. Like, we keep on going, we keep on growing.
Right.
And can recognize like how important it is to have access to new levels of love, which I think is what's available as you continue to grow. And I think that girl Lucy Lamp, she shares a lot about, or I've seen posts of hers where she talks about, you know, like having access to new levels of love, like constantly as you're evolving in relationship and divine union, and that being like, there's just always something new available and it never gets boring in a way. You know, people talk about being bored in relationship, which I find fascinating.
Yeah, because I'm like, what? Why?
And
it's fun. It's fun. We're having fun.
And I think also too, like, opening up to new levels of love only happens when we continue to evolve and love new versions of ourselves. Like I said earlier, like new versions of ourselves and then therefore each other. And yeah, so we share all these different episodes and stories and takeaways because there's a lot of power in stories and the lessons that are learned that allow us to share wisdom and create connections with one another going, because we're all just growing as we go.
Yep.
If you found parts of this podcast interesting, useful, or at the very least entertaining, I hope that you'll share your takeaways and tag me on social media or leave a review. We appreciate you and we'll see you next time.